Didn't it start?
Okay, there we go.
Okay, there we are. Yeah. Okay. So so thank you for the opportunity here to present the work on data protection. So today I will give an overview of the data protection modeling framework and kind of demonstrate the role this approach plays in doing a very systematic and comprehensive analysis for data protection concerns. So we all, of course, or probably most of us are very familiar with the GDPR, which requires us to do data protection by design and by default. And we need to implement both technical and organizational measures to implement these kind of principles. And that is really a very important mindset in that we need to really embed this in our approach and in how we design the systems that we are building to really take these concerns into consideration from the start. And the results here are part of a project where we collaborate with legal scholars. And we noticed, of course, in communication between technical and legal stakeholders that we have quite a different perspective and quite a different model and view on whatever system or data processing operation that we are describing or reasoning about. As software engineers, we're of course familiar with different types of modeling languages, models like UML, which has different diagrams, component and connector deployment. We use models also in the form of data flow diagrams for threat modeling. But of course, our legal stakeholders, they are much more familiar with large textual descriptions that kind of provide a lot of detailed information, but that also comes with a lot of downsides in kind of guaranteeing comprehensiveness and systematicity and how to deal with change. So the idea of the project is that we kind of take an interdisciplinary approach where we kind of combine the best of both worlds from both of these perspectives. So from our side, we want to leverage modeling support to precisely describe and capture the information on how data is processed. And of course, we need the legal stakeholders to kind of have that set of concepts to be precise in our description, because it has to make sense, of course, legally in what are processing operations and what are the different roles. So we need the correct set of concepts to reason about these elements. And then with that first step, of course, the modeling and capturing that in the right, using the right concepts to capture this information allows us to leverage some other benefits with this model representation, such as doing model queries and analysis to kind of identify problematic situations from a legal perspective. So that's again a strength that we can use because we capture this information in the model. But again, of course, the type of legal assessments, what kind of situations that we need to identify in these models, that's again input that we get from the legal stakeholders because they can, of course, correctly interpret the legal texts and provide us with the information of what kind of situations are potentially problematic from a legal perspective. So that is really kind of the key question that we try to answer here is, can we leverage these model-based techniques for legal analysis in support of data protection by design? So the approach that we take in this project is that we kind of provide a structured model to describe processing operations, again, with these concepts from the legal scholars. And with that information, there are a lot of things that we can actually automate and leverage tool support. So we can do a number of automated sanity checks, just at a kind of a description of a data processing operation, that it actually makes sense and that we have all the necessary information that should be there. Second element is that we can do these legal assessments and also in response to those assessments, to problematic situations, kind of add additional information in the model, embed some legal argumentation, and keep all this information in a central location. And then a third benefit is that we have the generation of different outputs because we have all this information structured and centered in a single model. We can also generate and extract accountability documentation for different types of stakeholders. And I will give a much more detailed overview in what that looks like and how we can achieve this. So the whole approach is embedded in the data protection modeling framework. So here we use Eclipse actually, so I think it's very relevant here to discuss. So we use the Eclipse modeling framework to construct the meta model. We have a graphical model editor that builds upon Sirius to kind of enable these legal stakeholders to use a bit more user-friendly concepts to represent these processing operations. And for the analysis, we use Viatra, another project in Eclipse to perform model query patterns and support the analysis for these legal assessments. Now, I will delve into a bit more detail about the concepts and then the type of assessments that we can perform. So this is a high-level overview of the meta model. I will not go over all these elements in detail because it's quite big, but I will give you kind of an overview of the types of concepts that are in there and how that allows us to accurately describe and reason about processing operations from the data protection perspective. So at the one hand, we have different parties that are involved in processing operations. So these are organizations, but in the GDPR, we also have the concept of a representative in the EU and the role they take in the processing. So some may be controller, some may be processor for some other party. So we need to be able to capture that legal distinction when we reason about these processings. Another element is, of course, reasoning about what exactly happens with the data. And again, there are a number of different concepts that are relevant, of course, from a legal perspective, whether that is a collection, a storage, where there's some additional requirements in how long data is kept, for example. Automated decision-making has some implications, disclosing data. So that's why we need to make a distinction between these types of processing activities. Then, of course, another element is the data itself. We need to know what kinds of personal data that we process and what the type of data subjects are. If they are children, for example, then maybe additional restrictions or legal implications, of course. So that's also possible to represent this. And then we have a number of more legal concepts that we need to capture, such as the purpose for processing, but also different types of lawful grounds that are relied upon for the processing of personal data. One that we are probably very familiar with is consent, because that pops up almost all the time on any website you visit. But there are, of course, a number of other lawful grounds, such as a contract or a legal obligation. And depending on which kind of lawful ground you rely, again, has legal implications later on. And by capturing that, you can, of course, use that information as part of the analysis. So, as I've already hinted to, by capturing these kind of processing operations, modeling them, and embedding the details on how data is processed, that gives us a number of benefits in that we can ensure that there's kind of a consistent description of how data is processed. We need to start with some collection. Either we directly collect it or we receive the data from some other party, but it's still a collection. And only then can we actually do some further processing. So we need to be consistent in how we describe those processing activities and which organizations are involved every step of the way. And by capturing that in a model, there are some constraints that can actually be very easily enforced or detected in the model. One example is which organizations are involved. By having that model link, it's very easy to identify if there's some element for which we have not specified which organization is the controller for that processing. We also need to have a sequence, so it's not that we can suddenly process some data out of the blue. So by again having these links between different kind of processing activities, that ensures that we kind of have a chain of processing operations and that we always start from an initial collection of personal data. And another element is, for example, the purpose. We can very easily verify that every kind of processing activity specifies a purpose, which also has to happen. Then for the more complex types of assessments we can perform, I will use a bit more complex example of a news recommender system. It's high level is just an application that you can, like a website that has a profile of a user of what are their interests and make some suggestions for news articles. So in the next step of the activity, we can extend this model with legal rationale. So as I've mentioned, we have the purposes, we have lawful grounds. There's some other information about exemptions if you have special types of personal data. And next, we use this model representation for more advanced analysis and documentation and kind of further enriching this with additional legal information. And this is, of course, input that comes from non-technical stakeholders. It kind of requires that legal expertise and background to provide this information. So to quickly illustrate that, so we describe the assessments as model patterns in our application. And these allows us to kind of detect configurations that are problematic or that require some additional legal rationale. And because of the implementation with the model in Eclipse and the query patterns, we can be very efficient actually in doing this analysis and making efficiently reassessing it as we make changes to the model. So that allows us to easily make corrections and see that it indeed solves the problems that we identify. So a quick example, a bit more details on what such a pattern looks like. So here we have, for example, the need to have a representative in the EU. So we use this kind of pattern description to find that there is an organization. It has a legal role with regard to a certain processing, and that organization is not established in the EU. And then the final check of the pattern is that we don't find any kind of representative for this organization. So this is a very easy way to automatically identify these kinds of problematic situations in the model. Another example is the purpose compatibility. So for every processing, like every purpose actually has to be compatible with the purpose for which we originally collected the data. Here we can find that either we don't find any information that they are explicitly compatible. So that's again part of that legal information that we kind of can embed in the model. Or maybe we even find an explicit incompatibility because some legal stakeholder earlier already specified that certain purposes are incompatible. I won't go into too much detail, but again, you see a very similar way of describing these situations that we kind of declaratively specify. There is a collection with some lawful ground, it has a purpose, and we find it's explicitly marked as compatible because some legal stakeholder provided that documentation in the model. That's one situation. So you see here on the right-hand side that there is actually that extra symbol that makes that link between these elements. So that's the extra input of a legal stakeholder. Another possible situation is actually that your processing refers to the exact same purpose as the collection. So, and that's of course a benefit of a model-based approach. If they point to the exact same model element, then we know, of course, that the purpose is exactly the same. So the compatibility check is actually trivial in this case. So it's by doing this kind of systematic assessment over the model that we can kind of continuously extend and expand the information in the model. And of course, the same check applies for finding incompatibilities because we can also include this and kind of reuse this information over time as well. And then a final element to demonstrate is the accountability documentation. So because we structure and capture all this information in the model, we have all that information actually in a central source. So there's kind of one source of truth rather than different textual documents and different revisions and modifications. So that's already a benefit. If you make any changes, you kind of, and would make something, a change that would violate or make something inconsistent that was defined or created earlier, it's very easy to identify these situations. So you know you have a consistent and elaborate description. But a second benefit is that because you have all this information in the model, that you can also kind of systematically extract different variants of that information depending on the type of stakeholder. So you have the information on the data subject, the different types. So you could generate kind of the information for every type of data subjects. These are the types of data that we process for these types of purposes, because it's all encoded in the model. It's very easy to extract the information. The same for drafting privacy policies, of course, because it's such a rich description. But also a more extensive report as kind of a start for a DPIA report that needs to be provided to supervisory authority, again, because all those details are present in the model. I will demonstrate them in the tool itself later, but because I have to switch the screen sharing, I think it won't break the flow of the presentation. So with that and those illustrations, I think it's a nice example of how a model-based way of doing compliance assessments really has some compelling benefits in tackling this problem and reasoning about our data processing operations. So as I've mentioned, because of this single encoding and single source, we don't duplicate any information. We prevent inconsistent modifications. We can easily reevaluate if changes are made. And we kind of document by design the type of steps and measures that we make, because we kind of continually enrich and expand this model description with that information. So just using it and fixing the problems that arise kind of helps you and is part of the process on getting to a more compliant processing operations. And as I mentioned, yeah, the change being very easy to reevaluate, make sure that you also don't make any modifications later on that would prove inconsistent or conflicting with earlier decisions that were made. So to wrap up, it really requires an interdisciplinary approach to realize data protection by design. You have technical expertise that is necessary, of course, to know how a system is designed, what information is processed, but there's also legal expertise necessary to kind of reason about these obligations in the GDPR, being precise about describing those processing operations and ensure appropriate measures. So that was really the idea in our framework, and the approach is kind of to leverage both of these expertises, one in expressing the information and the types of assessments that need to be performed, and the other one, of course, in being able to precisely capture this information in a model and enable a number of automated sanity checks and legal analysis in support of such an activity. Then a final element that was also mentioned before is a repository of publicly available DPIAs. So this is kind of part of a longer-term roadmap where we see, on the one hand, we have these efforts in developing a framework and capturing and describing these data processing operations. And we noticed there, of course, it's not very easy to evaluate these kinds of tools and these kinds of descriptions, because there's not a lot of good publicly available information to support such activities. And as part of that process, we also focused and recently released a repository of publicly available DPIAs to kind of build and construct that data set. And I think that's definitely also a community effort to kind of continuously expand and improve such a repository. And this provides exactly the kind of information to also evaluate and create these processing operations in different tools and frameworks to see that they actually match up and are able to express all the complex situations that happen in the real world. So that's part of the effort with the DPIA repository to construct that set. Currently, that is, of course, a set of mainly PDF reports with textual descriptions. As I've mentioned before, this is the preferred view or model in a way of our legal stakeholders. But we think this has a lot of potential to actually provide alternative representations in different modeling tools, in different alternative formats. So you kind of have a very rich and extensive collections of the same processing operations in a variety of different representations, which gives a lot of potential, I think, also from an analysis perspective to evaluate different types of tools and to evaluate also the state of these DPIAs and model representations, compare different representations, do longitudinal analyses. So I think there's a lot of potential in the long term in kind of leveraging this information in a variety of different research tracks. So with that overview of the DPMF, I will give a quick illustration in the tool itself. I managed to change the sharing of the screen. Okay, I hope you see a modeling tool now. Is that visible for everyone? Yes, okay. So what we have here is a model representation. So this is the graphical editor of the view of the model. And I'm just going to do some very small checks to kind of illustrate what is possible with the tool. So in this case, because of the model representation, we can, of course, do some validation and identify problematic situations easily in the model. Let me check. You see that it shows here. The view shows here. Okay. Here's the legal assessment. It's a better demonstration, I think. So the view you see on the right-hand side is the legal analysis that you can perform. So this will load in the model and show all the different types of legal assessments that are performed. So what you can see here are a number of checks. They're, of course, categorized according to different assessment types, such as the lawfulness, such as the purpose compatibility. So you see some elements that are highlighted here because there is an explicit incompatibility, because some information is missing, because some elements aren't specified. Just one concrete example, we have a storage here of personal data. And of course, we need to be explicit about how long, it's a bit difficult to, how long that data is stored. So according to GDPR, we either need to specify some retention criteria, or we need to specify that we keep this data for 2 years, for example. And it's only when we actually have that information in the model, you see now that it immediately updates in the view, because the storage limitation now, it's no longer read because we have provided that information in the model. There are some other elements I can demonstrate just to show you that we can use this to get different types of information from the model. So here we have, based on the data subject that are specified in the model, we automatically show these are the collections, these are the controllers, these are the types of data, what purpose, what lawful ground. So if you have a very extensive description with a lot of different parties, a lot of different data subjects, you can kind of extract for every type of data subject the relevant information that you need to provide to them. And then a final example is the DPIA report. So this is a more extensive export of the information in the model, which automatically, I don't know if that will show in Eclipse as well, I don't think so. I have to share a different screen again. So if you see the document, I hope it's showing. So this is kind of a textual report that is automatically extracted based on some template by, I think we used the one from the Dutch Supervisory Authority. Again, very detailed description of processing operations, purposes, involved parties, and all this information is automatically extracted based on that model. So that gives us kind of all, it can also include the diagrams that were created, all the metadata of the different data types, data subject types. So it really shows the power, I think, to kind of automatically extract that information and provide that in a format where a legal stakeholder can further add some extra information and kind of assist in their reporting and creation of accountability documentation. So I think with that, I gave you an overview of the DPMF, where we are and what we have in current functionality and kind of leveraging these model representations for data protection impact assessments.
Well, thank you so much.
Questions?
This is, it's very positive, and I'll make some comments later, but I'm going to just stop the recording, and I hope I can do that. Let's see, without... They keep changing.
I have a
Can you
button.
stop? Can you stop it
Yes.
then, Laurent? Thank you.